Hello viewers, a good day to you all. Today I have before us differentiation by first principle. Differentiation is also known as derivatives or rate of change of one concept with respect to another. So we have the very first question before us, y equals to x squared. So we'll be using differentiation by first principle to handle this particular concept, y equals to x squared. We'll be dealing with 2 or 3 questions as the time permits us. So we'll start with this. Now, when we want to differentiate using first principle, there are actually a set of steps that are used in differentiation by first principle. But then, as we solve this question, I'll be taking time to explain the concept one after the other. Right. So the first thing to do now is to add a little change in y to y. So that's going to be y plus delta y. And then when that happens to y on the left hand side, the same thing is going to happen to what? X. Now whatever was happening to y also is going to happen to what? Delta y. Sorry about this. Whatever was happening to y will also happen to what? Delta y. So we are going to have y plus delta y. And at the other side of the equal sign, x here, whatever was happening to x also is going to happen to what? Delta x. So first of all, we are going to write also x plus delta x. So this symbol is called delta. This symbol is also called delta. They are the same. Delta y, delta x. Delta means what? A little change in y or a little change in x. Now, as x was being squared before now, so these two also will be what? Will be squared. So that's going to be x plus delta x squared. So the next thing now is to expand this particular one. And of course, if you watch one of my previous videos on binomial expansion, we are going to see the concept of a plus b in brackets being squared, which is expanded as a squared plus 2ab plus what? B squared. So we are going to be applying this particular concept. So these are a is what? X, and then b is what? Our delta x. And when we have that, we expand, we are going to be having it to be x squared in the place of a plus 2ab, and in this case it's going to be our a is what? X, and our b is what? Delta x. So 2x delta x, that's 2ab, and then plus b squared. B squared is delta x being squared, because delta x is what? B, what represents b in that particular expansion. One mistake I like to tell students that they should try to avoid is this: they should not say x multiplied by delta x. Delta x is an entity on its own. X is an entity on its own. In fact, this delta x is just a single value. Sometimes some textbook will use h in the place of delta x. So it's still the same thing. X multiplied by delta x is x delta x. X multiplied by delta x is x delta x. If you write delta x squared, please, you should know that it's already wrong. X multiplied by delta x is not delta x squared, but it is written as what? X delta x. And that's why we have this one to be 2x delta x. And then the last part, which is delta x squared. So that is what we have in that. And this is the same thing as our y plus delta y. Now, of course, after we have done this, we have done the expansion. The next thing is that to make delta y the subject formula. How do we make delta y the subject formula? So we are going to subtract y from both sides, and that's going to be y plus delta y minus y on the left hand side. The same thing will be applicable to the right hand side. X squared plus 2x delta x, then plus delta x squared, as we have that there. Then it's also going to be what? Minus y, as we have it for this left hand side. Now y minus y will become what? 0, because they are going to cancel out. What will be left with here is what? Delta y. So delta y will now be equals to x squared plus 2x delta x, and then plus delta x squared. Now we are going to say minus y, but then instead of writing y this time around, we are going to use the equivalent of y, which is from the start of the equation. So that's going to be x squared. So we'll be having minus x squared in the place of y here. And of course, the beginning here is x squared, and the last one here is also minus x squared. So we are going to x squared minus y minus x squared will be equals to 0. So both of them are going to cancel out. It means our delta y will now be equal to 2x delta x plus delta x squared, because these two would have cancelled out. We'll be left with just these two. So once we have been able to achieve this particular feat, we have been able to see that we have simplified the right hand side of the expression, or the equation as you may want to say. Then the next thing now is to divide both sides by delta x. And when we divide both sides by delta x, that's going to be delta y divided by delta x. That's going to be equals to 2x delta x divided by delta x, and then plus delta x being squared also divided by what? Delta x. So this delta x here will cancel this delta x. Cancel this one. We'll be left with only 2x here. 2x. And this delta x squared, what does delta x squared mean? Delta x squared means delta x multiplied by delta x. And both are now being divided by what? Delta x. So what happens in that situation? This delta x is going to cancel one of this. We'll be left with only 1. So it means that delta x here 1. This is going to cancel this 2. We'll be left with only delta x. That's going to be plus delta x. So it means that delta y plus delta x, over delta x have been simplified to this. So what is the next thing to do? The next thing is to limit delta x tending to 0. Limit delta x to approach 0. So we are going to have it to be like this. Limit as delta x tends to what? To 0. And once you limit delta x to tend to 0, the next thing is that this delta y over delta x will change form. And when it changes form, it's going to be dy by dx, which of course is a familiar concept in what? Differentiation. So dy by dx, what happens? This one turns to dy by dx, but on the other side, which is the right hand side of the equation, anywhere you see delta x, you're going to be putting what? You're going to be putting 0 in its place. So that's going to be 2x plus 0. And of course, 2x plus 0 is going to be what? It's going to be 2x. So that tells us that our dy by dx, as we have it here, is equals to 2x. Very simple and straightforward. So ladies and gentlemen, that's that for the first one, which is the derivative of x squared, y equals to x squared. When we differentiate y with respect to what? X. Using first principle, we are going to be having dy by dx is equals to what? 2x. So we'll be moving on to the second question immediately. Alright, on to the second question now. Question says y equals to 5x cubed plus 7x squared minus 13. So we are going to look for the differentiation or the derivative of this function using the what? The first principle. That's what we want to do now. So as we have it, like we did in our previous question, the question before this, we are going to have y plus delta y, a little change in y added to y, and when we do that, we are going to have it to be equal to, we are also going to add a little change in x to what? To x. And since we have x here, so we'll be having x plus delta x also. Now, because before now x was being cubed, it means that x plus delta x, remember whatever was happening to x also happens to delta x. X plus delta x now will be cubed also. Not just that it was being cubed, there is a coefficient, 5 is multiplying x cubed. So this 5 is going to come outside this bracket to mean that 5 is multiplying both x and delta x, and not just that, both of them are being affected to this power 3. So that is the idea of whatever happens to x also happens to what? Delta x. And then for the second one, we are going to be having it as, since it is 7 here and it is x squared, so we are going to have x plus delta x first of all, and then this x plus delta x will be squared as x was being squared, and then beside it there's going to be what? A 7. That's that. The next thing to do now is to what? Subtract 13. And if you look at the 13 is just a number on its own. There is no element of x with 13. So no x or no delta x will be added here since there was no x with 13. If there had been x with 13, then we would have added what? Delta x also. Whatever was happening to that x also happens to what? The delta x. So when a number is standing on its own, remember when in one of my videos, when a number is standing on its own without any variable with it, that number is said to be what? A constant. So 13 here or negative 13 here is a constant. So the next thing to do now is to simplify this right hand side like we did when we were finding the derivative of y is equals to x squared. So how do we simplify this one? We expand the bracket. And also in my video in the binomial expansion, remember, binomial expansion of bracket. If you have not watched that video, I advise that you go and watch it so that you'll be familiar with expansion of bracket. And in that video, I have this a plus b to the third power, that's a raised plus b raised to power 3 as we have it here. That is actually equal to a cubed plus 3a squared b plus 3ab squared and then plus what? B cubed. But in this case, what we're dealing with x and what? Delta x. So it means that we are going to be having it as s plus delta x, both being cubed. What it means that s is in the position of a and delta s is in the position of b. So we are going to apply this particular idea also. So we'll be having it to be x cubed plus 3x squared delta x, 3x squared delta x, plus the next one 3x delta x squared, 3x delta x squared, and then finally plus delta x cubed, which is in the position of b, delta x cubed. Now this expansion that we have here will come and take the position of x plus delta x cubed in the question that we are solving. So that becomes 5 open bracket x cubed plus 3x squared delta x plus 3x delta x squared, as we have it there, and then plus delta x cubed. So this is the expansion that we have for this first one. The next one is to expand this particular one, and that's going to be plus 7 open bracket x plus delta x squared. Still on the binomial expansion video, that's going to be x squared, and of course even in the previous question that we solved, the first question, x squared plus 2x delta x and then plus delta x squared. That is the expansion of that. And then as we have it, the final one, which is what? Minus 13. So this is what we have by the expansion. Alright, and we should not forget that this is the same thing as y plus delta y, because it is y plus delta y that we expanded that give us this expression after the equal sign. So the next thing to do now is to open the bracket. Then when we open the bracket, we'll see what we can do next. So that tells us that y plus delta y will be equals to 5 multiplied by x cubed. That's going to be 5x cubed plus 5 multiplied by 3x squared. That's going to be 15x squared delta x. And then plus 5 multiplied by this, that's going to be 15x delta x squared. And then finally 5 multiplied by this, that's going to be 5 delta x cubed. So the next thing is to expand the second bracket using this 7 that is at the back. So in the expansion, 7 multiplied by x squared, that's going to be plus 7x squared. And then plus 7 multiplied by 2x, that's going to be equals to what? 14x delta x. And then 7 multiplied by this, that's going to be plus 7 delta x squared. And finally, minus 13. That's what we have. Moving on, the next thing now is to make delta y the subject formula. How do we make delta y the subject? So that becomes y plus delta y minus y. That's the left hand side. Whatever happens to the left hand side also happens to the right hand side. So that becomes 5x cubed. I'll be writing everything down here. Plus 15x squared delta x plus 15x delta x squared plus 5 delta x cubed minus 7x squared plus, sorry, this is also plus 7x squared plus 14x delta x and then plus 7 delta x squared minus 13, and of course that's going to be also equals to minus y, because we are subtracting y from this left hand side. We also subtract y from the right hand side. This is where this one stops, and then we are now going to have to subtract y. So what happens? This y is going to cancel this y. All we left with here now is what? Is delta y, which is standing on its own. And delta y will now be equal to, so writing this again, so we'll be having 5x cubed plus 15x squared delta x plus 15x delta x squared plus 5 delta x cubed plus 7x squared plus 14x delta x plus 7 delta x squared and then minus 13 and minus, now in the place of y, what is the equivalent of y? Everything in here, everything up here, they are the equivalent of y. So we are now going to change y, and we are going to put those things that represent y in brackets. So what we have is 5x cubed. So we're putting them in brackets. 5x cubed. The next one is plus 7x squared, and finally minus 13. That's what we have in this bracket. So the next thing again is to open that bracket, and when we open that bracket, whatever can cancel out will cancel out directly. So we'll be having that to be equals to 5x cubed plus 15x squared delta x plus 15x delta x squared plus 5 delta x cubed plus 7x squared plus 14x delta x plus 7 delta x squared minus 13. Okay, so the next thing is to open this bracket. The sign here is minus, the sign here is plus. Minus times plus there is going to be minus 5x cubed. Minus and then plus. Minus times plus is also going to be what? Minus 7x squared. And this time around, minus times minus, that's going to be plus and plus 13. So that's what we have. So after we have gotten that, the next thing to do is to look for those ones that look alike and see how they can cancel out. So this is 5x cubed. This is also what? 5x cubed. But this one is positive 5x cubed, whereas this one is negative 5x cubed. So we have 5s cubed minus 5s cubed. That's going to be equal to what? 0. Of course, it means that they can cancel out. 5s cubed minus 5s cubed have cancelled out. The next one is 7s squared plus 7s squared and then minus 7s squared. So 7s squared minus 7s squared, that becomes 0. It means that these two also we have to work to cancel out. Then finally, minus 13 plus 13. Of course, minus 13 plus 13 is going to be equal to 0. Also, these also cancel out. So let's know how many of the concepts are remaining. So that means that delta y will now be equal to, as we have it here, 15 x squared delta x plus the next one 15x delta x squared, 15x delta x squared, and then plus 5 delta x cubed as we have it here. The next one, this has been cancelled, I will jump to this. That's going to be plus 14x delta x, and then plus 7 delta x squared. Any other one after 7 delta x squared, every other thing afterwards, they have been cancelled out. So this is what we have as our delta y. Delta y has been simplified to this. After that, what's the next thing now? Since you have simplified delta y, everything has been cut short. The next thing is to divide delta y by delta x. So we have delta y over delta x. And when we have delta y over delta x, this becomes 15x squared delta x over delta x. And then plus the next one, 15x delta x squared, also divided by delta x. And then plus 5 delta x cubed divided by delta x also. Next one, plus 14x delta x also divided by delta x, and finally plus 7 delta x squared divided by delta x. So all of these are being divided by delta x as we have done to the left hand side of the expression. So what's the next thing now? We see which ones can cancel out. Delta x here will cancel delta x. This delta x under here will cancel one of these, will be left with only one delta x there. This delta x here will cancel one of these, will be left with what? Delta x squared. This delta x also will cancel this delta x, and then we'll be left with only 14x. This delta x will cancel one of these, will be left with only delta x. So it means that delta y by delta x, after we have done all our cancellation and simplify, the next thing is 15x squared. That's what is remaining here, 15x squared, plus the next one, 15x delta x, 15x delta x, plus the next one, 5 delta x squared, because out of 3 1 has been cancelled, will be left with 2, so that's going to be 5 delta x squared, plus what we are left with here is 14x, and then finally plus 7 delta x, because one of these would have been cancelled, so we'll be left with 7 delta x. So after we have simplified our delta y over delta x, remember in the first one, the next one is what? To limit delta x to tend to 0. So when we limit delta x to tend to 0, what happens in that situation? Delta y over delta x becomes dy by dx. That becomes dy by dx. So let me bring them up here. So delta y over delta x immediately turns to dy by dx when we limit delta x to tend to 0. So this becomes dy by dx. And when we have dy by dx on the left hand side, what happens to the right hand side? Anywhere we see delta x, because it has been tended towards 0 now, we put 0 in its place. So here we have 15x squared. It's still going to remain as 15x squared. No delta x attached to it, so it remains as it is. Plus the next one, 15x delta x, that's 15x multiplied by 0. So that's going to be 15x multiplying 0. Plus the next one, 5 delta x squared, that's 5 multiplying 0 square, as we have it. Plus the next one, 14x, that one is not carrying delta x, so that's going to be plus 14x directly. And finally, plus 7 delta s, so that's going to be 7 multiplying 0. So eventually, what happens? Our dy by the x will now be equals to 15x squared. This, when we multiply it by 0, any number multiplied by 0 becomes what? 0. So it will cancel out automatically because of that element of 0. 5 multiplied by 0 square, 0 square is still 0. So 5 multiplied by 0 is still what? 0. That has cancelled out also. Then we are left with what? Plus 14x. Plus 14x. And then finally, 7 multiplied by 0 is also going to what? Cancel out because it becomes 0. So dy by dx from this expression is 15x squared plus 14x. 15x squared plus 14x. So when you differentiate y equals to 5x cubed plus 7x squared minus 13 with respect to x, it's going to give us what? 15x squared plus what? 14x. And that is differentiation by first principle using those two examples. And until I come your way again, let's take a look at this concept. It is not a very difficult. In fact, it's not difficult at all. What you need is that, well, the only thing about it is that it's very lengthy, quite alright. You can see how long these things are on the board, and you have to be very procedural for you to be sure that you don't miss anything out. Because any little mistake, once you lose or you lost 1 naira, or 1 kobo in any of these things, you are going to have problems, so to say, in the computation of the final result or other steps that are to follow. So aside that, if you are very procedural, you are very careful in the steps that you are taking, you see that you are going to just flow and enjoy yourself. So mathematics is actually a subject where you flow, your mind, your body, everything works together, your spirit, everything works together, and you just enjoy yourself. So with this little one that I bring before you, please enjoy yourself. Peace out.